Woohoo, a hernia exam is an okay episode of Two and a Half Men. We do have some good moments, but it's definitely not a personal favourite. And that's not because there's anything wrong with it. I just feel like not a lot happens. So there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode. But to be honest, I don't have a tremendous amount to say about this, but nevertheless, I will explain what happens and talk about a few things that I rather enjoyed. It starts off quite entertainingly with Berta handing Alan a toilet seat. And this is because she refuses to clean Jake's toilet because he's making a mess. And I'll just briefly talk about that part of the narrative first, and then I'll talk about the rest of it. Later on in the episode, we actually see Jake cleaning the toilet while Berta is in the background. And on the one hand, I feel like that's quite a task to give a child. But at the same time, if they see just how much of a task it is to clean up, maybe they'll be a little bit more thoughtful in the process. I loved the comment about the Cheerio. Thought that was very vivid. And we also find out that Jake peed in the sink, the kitchen sink, at one point, which is not something I want to think about. It was an okay part of the episode. It was padding and it was fine. To be honest, I kind of preferred most of that to the main narrative, which doesn't really say much for the main narrative. The main narrative is actually established in the opening scene as well, because a woman comes downstairs wearing Charlie's shirt. And what I found really peculiar about this is that she buttoned up the whole shirt. She'd clearly been upstairs with Charlie doing things that I can't talk about on YouTube, and she'd come rushing downstairs to find Alan because Charlie's hurt. And yes, I can imagine her throwing on the shirt and buttoning up, I can't say the word buttoning up maybe one or two buttons, but she'd done the whole thing. Who has time for that? It was a brief observation. I'm not really complaining, just something that I noticed. And it turns out that Charlie has hurt his back, and Alan, as the chiropractor, helps him identify where the pain is. Charlie screams, he ends up on the floor, they go into the car, and I did think the discussion about Dr. Schwartz in Beverly Hills was pretty well written. Not exactly something that I'd say I thoroughly enjoyed, but I found that to be relatively interesting as they're trying to identify where this doctor is. They eventually make it to the surgery. We meet Dr. Talmadge, played by Alicia Coppola, and she was a relatively interesting character. There was definitely something about her that I didn't predict, and that part of the episode I did think was well done, and I'll talk about that when we get there. Alan is spending the entire time trying to seem like he's a doctor in the same league that the others are, but they are definitely looking down at chiropractors, which might not be fair because Alan has gone through extensive school and training to get to where he is. But at the same time, I can understand why other doctors might not like it when chiropractors try and pretend that they're in the same league as them. So personally, I have no opinions on that. I wouldn't look at a chiropractor and say, you're not a real doctor, but I can understand where the other doctors are coming from. And I particularly liked it. One of the moments I did find funny is when the doctor said to Alan, your mother must be very proud. And Alan just replies, no expressions. Actually, no. I enjoyed it. Probably my favourite line, that and the Cheerio line, I loved. Alan tries to tell Charlie, and this I found to be quite thought-provoking. He tries to tell Charlie that he just spends his life going from one encounter to the next, never really thinking about the feelings of the women he's casting aside. And Alan says that something bad will happen and it will catch up to him. And this pain he's feeling just now is not enough. And I personally do kind of believe that. It's karma, and I believe that is how the universe works. But it is really interesting to think that for some people, maybe things will just go right their entire life. And that's such a complex thing to think about. But it did make me think that I think everybody, or at least most people, will have the thought that if everything is going right for them, whether that's their relationship's going well, their finances are good, they're enjoying their job, something bad has to happen. Because things cannot be that good for any great length of time. But is that the case? Is it possible to just have things happen in a very positive way without this threat of a looming disaster or even just a slight problem? I found it to be really interesting because Charlie was adamant that no, that doesn't have to be the case. I can just go from one encounter to the next. A bad thing doesn't have to happen to make things balanced. That's not how the world works, whereas Alan is adamant that it is how the world works. If you have any strong opinions on that, I'd love to know. I am pretty much of the mind that that's how the world works, but am I just being a pessimist in thinking that? I don't know. I don't have a concrete answer. But the episode made me think. And I liked that it made me think about that. And then Charlie does get a bit of karmic justice from the universe. Because, well, actually, before we get to that, there is a third quote that I loved. And it's when Alan said, it's like trying to talk Shakespeare to a Hershey bar. Absolutely loved it. Charlie does get the justice or the justice delivered to him, because it turns out that he had actually previously slept with the doctor. And of course, never phoned her back. And she reveals this right while she has some very sensitive parts of Charlie's anatomy in her hand. And I thought, I liked the episode. The fact that the episode was saying, yes, actually, that is how the universe works. Things will come back to bite you, so to speak. So it wasn't a bad way to ultimately take the episode. But as I said, I didn't completely love it. There's nothing bad about it, none at all. And it actually raises some interesting thoughts and interesting questions as well, and made me think about things. So definitely some good points. But if I were to sit down and say, I want to watch an episode, what episode will I pick? I honestly don't think I'd ever choose Woohoo, a hernia exam. Not bad, nothing wrong with it, but definitely not a personal favourite.